Hello,
Hey there.
how are you doing?
Good. How about you guys?
Good, good, good. Progress is slow but relentless, as usual. Last week I mentioned that there were two big mathematical restructurings of the proof system
I
that
don't. I don't
were.
think. I don't remember you mentioning two big things. I thought you talked more in terms of low hanging fruit, and that would still take up the next couple of weeks. I might be wrong though, but that's what I remember.
Uh, yeah, there is fruit hanging all over the tree, and we try to rank order the fruits by how much effort does it take to pluck them, and what's the reward in case we do. Um, and besides that rank ordering, there's also a classification in terms of is this related to the instruction set architecture? Is this just related to programming? Is this just related, or is this related to some mathematical cleverness? And yeah, my brain is devoted mostly to the mathematical aspect. And so since I have the most intimate knowledge there, that's what I can report on. But I can also assure you that there's progress happening on the other fronts. I just don't know intimately what that progress is exactly off the top of my head.
But still, more or less on the same schedule you were last week and the weeks before.
What was the schedule then?
Well, you don't feel like you guys are being bogged down with this. You still feel like it's moving along nicely.
Oh no, it's definitely moving. It's definitely moving in the right direction. And yeah, so I was beginning that sentence last week. I mentioned two big mathematical changes to the proof system, and now we're down to one. We rather unexpectedly uh, got the first mathematical restructure down in a lot less time than expected. I thought it was going to take at least a week, and in the end, it was 2 days or something. So yeah, hats off to Thor who did that.
Cool.
But yeah, besides that, not much news to report on the development front. We're marching slowly but steadily, relentlessly forward.
All right. In that case, there's another topic I want to throw in here. I was talking to somebody about Neptune, and they asked me why aren't they building on top of Bitcoin, and I did not have a good answer. And in the meantime, I see that you wrote an entire post about it, so I thought you probably put some thought into that. So let's talk about that.
Did I write this post in the meantime, or did you see that I wrote it in the meantime?
I think I became aware of it. Yes,
Got it.
it's not that
The
old though. I think.
It's not that old now. It's one of the newer posts, and I'm glad to see that one of the posts I wrote is actually answering questions that people have. Um, yeah, so why not build on top of Bitcoin? I'm curious. Why is that? Why is that the right question to ask?
So I can only speak for myself, but there's this sentiment that Bitcoin is this amazing public good, and that we are all very lucky that the founder is still anonymous and disappeared. So there's no sort of political direction, um, and many people could just contribute out of just because they resonate with that ethos. I think, and so it would be, I don't know, it would be perfectly legitimate to also say let's devote ourselves to improving upon that, because basically what you're saying is, listen, the things, we had the analogy of a car making a better car. You could start with the existing car and upgrade it versus starting from scratch. So it's not entirely clear why you are starting from scratch.
I'm not sure cars are public goods though, but Perhaps
Sure.
the invention of the combustion engine is a public good, and then why indeed uh, start from scratch, inventing a new one where you might as well improve on the existing blueprint.
For
Um,
instance, yeah.
that's a fair question. And while we're on this topic, I'll float some thoughts I had around it also, which is that there is this perception that alternative cryptocurrencies are in competition with Bitcoin. And maybe that's true, maybe that's not true. I think they are probably in competition with each other in some respects, but they are certainly joined at the hips in competition with fiat. And that's why I think the competitive perspective is maybe not the right one. Uh, but sure, if you adopt this perspective, then it seems like we're trying to tear Bitcoin down because we're building an alternative that might swallow Bitcoin's market share, and people who hold
Um,
Bitcoin end up with less valuable Bitcoins as a result.
I mean, I guess that's the dark side of the argument. Personally, I wasn't thinking that far, but yeah, feel free to dismantle that argument.
Well, I'm not sure I can. It's possible that Neptune swallows market share from Bitcoin, um, but the point remains that it's difficult to build on top of Bitcoin. Technologically difficult to build on top of Bitcoin. Um, there are various options in terms of what you can do. Um, Either you stick with the current protocol and develop some kind of overlay protocol that still uses Bitcoin script as it is, no changes, the Bitcoin protocol as a backbone. But in addition to speaking the Bitcoin protocol as a backbone, you can speak something else also. That's pretty much the strategy that Lightning has taken. Um, and I think Lightning is a fantastic project. It is the way to scale cryptocurrencies. Um, but Lightning is rather limited in the sense that you cannot really do meaningful smart contracts. What you can do is you can define new tokens and then have the distribution of those new tokens be contingent upon the correct execution of some kind of smart contract. You can do this on Lightning, no problem. But what you cannot do on Lightning is have the distribution of Bitcoins be contingent upon the execution of smart contracts. And so
Because they're locked up.
it's not because they're locked up, it's because the blockchain base protocol does not recognize the smart contract. And and so if there is a dispute about the smart contract, then there's no way to resolve it.
Hmm.
And so why would two participants on the same Lightning channel um, even define such a smart contract if it cannot be trustlessly resolved in case of dispute? So Lightning has its limitations. Um, and then another strategy that some people do is they build a side chain. And on the side chain, yes, you can do fantastic things. You can add privacy. You can change the proof of work algorithm if you like. You could switch to proof of stake if you want. You can try all sorts of technologies, but the problem is how do you get your bitcoins there and how do you get them back? The solution that they've come up with so far is you send your bitcoins to some kind of centralized authority and they sign off when you want to withdraw. And we don't like that solution because it involves trusted authorities. We want a solution where you can withdraw to on chain bitcoins without trusting anyone else. And that just doesn't exist. Uh, Go
But
ahead.
what about just proposing a change to Bitcoin?
Um, I think you can probably be successful if you have an incremental change, one that does not affect consensus, or if it affects consensus, affects it in the most benign, uncontroversial way, such that your change will enjoy the consensus of pretty much anyone who would need to weigh in order for that change to be adopted. The problem with Bitcoin is it is its governance policy is incredibly conservative because because nobody is in charge. The people who deploy updates in the form of code, they don't want to assume that responsibility, and so they delegate this responsibility of being in charge, whatever that means, to the best possible alternative, which is a meritocratic debate in which hopefully a consensus arises about which changes are good and which changes are bad. And so, in order for a upgrade to Bitcoin to be adopted, it would need to survive in the course of this debate. It would need to enjoy the support of the majority of the people with decision power. And that just doesn't work for controversial changes. And I'm afraid that our technology is rather controversial.
Hmm.
For instance, because we introduce new cryptographic hardness assumptions, and because the sizes of transactions and blocks changes, and so on. So yeah, we could still propose a change to Bitcoin, but then how do we pay our salaries? Part of the conundrum is how do we raise money to pay our salaries? And it's a lot easier to raise money to pay salaries if you can promise your investors a token after you've launched. You cannot do this if you're building on top of Bitcoin.
Fair enough. And how do you imagine the industry responds to, let's say, you launch with some measure of success. um, it becomes apparent that some of the solutions you guys have developed are good and relevant to Bitcoin, but also other cryptocurrencies. Um, do you imagine that they're going to incorporate those, or do you expect most to be too conservative, like Bitcoin? Or is this not a relevant line of thought for you?
I don't think it's irrelevant. Um, I guess I think it's very unlikely that our technologies, even if they are proven, what is it, in the on the market over the course of decades, I think it's still very unlikely that they will be integrated into Bitcoin because Bitcoin is just too conservative. I think it's way more likely that they will be integrated into a host of other cryptocurrencies. And they will be integrated. The primary driver for their integration probably the the strong confidence in their security and their value, as attested to by the price. And so the world in
But
which
but
I have to be concerned about other blockchains adopting our technology is a world in which we've already succeeded.
But don't you think that Bitcoin's conservatism, that's more of a measure in relation to the environment? So what I mean by that is if you know quantum computers get invented, then we'll probably see that conservatism sort of disappear and a fix being developed rather quickly and being agreed on rather quickly. At least that's what I would
That's
imagine.
what I would imagine too in the specific isolated case of quantum computers. What is Bitcoin going to do in relation to privacy?
Well, I mean, I've seen people like Edward Snowden. They commented on Twitter a while ago that he's been prodding Bitcoin developers to include privacy, and I could imagine. I don't know what their discussions are like, but I could imagine that they feel like it's not obvious how to implement that, how to make Bitcoin, let's say, private. It's not obvious, but let's say Neptune makes that obvious, then I mean, maybe I'm simplifying things too much, but I could also imagine that then things also become rather clear, like, oh, holy shit, that's the solution, and then the conservatism disappears again, and they implement it.
No, every privacy architecture comes with trade-offs.
Mm-hmm.
And in our case, every block has around 300 kilobytes devoted just to maintaining this what is it, privacy preserving database called a mutator set. Back in the blockchain war days, people decided that Bitcoin was the right fork as opposed to Bitcoin Cash precisely because of the blocks. It was an
Right.
argument that you should be able to run this on machines with very low bandwidth because that's the way to achieve decentralization. And in the eyes of someone like that, spending 300 kilobytes per block on a database that gives privacy that they might not agree with to begin with, I can imagine that they just wouldn't agree. Certainly not if there are corporate and institutional interests being deployed, lobbying against the integration of privacy.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. And how have you guys thought about this conservatism? Because I remember a slide you shared on a previous call we had about it being basically an advantage and a disadvantage. Is there is there a sort of a level of conservatism you're hoping to achieve, or is this like, are we talking too far in the future because we're talking about the community of Neptune
Now,
developers,
in
etc.?
terms of what kind of money would I like to keep the majority of my net wealth, I think Bitcoin has the right amount of conservatism. I would like to achieve just that. The tragedy of Bitcoin is that it was first. All the technologies that can improve it were developed after Bitcoin came. And yeah, that's another reason why we think we have to start over from scratch. It's not because we're displacing Bitcoin; it's because we want to stand on Bitcoin's shoulders and integrate all the technologies that can improve it that were only developed to begin with after Bitcoin showed that they were necessary and useful.
And what are those? Could you just list the ones that come to
Zero
mind for you?
knowledge snarks, for
Mm-hmm.
starters, accumulator schemes. I think smart contracts, to some degree, people have some misconceptions about smart contracts that maybe we can digress a little into addressing. One of the big questions of our lifetime is which things belong on the blockchain. And in the early days of Ethereum, it was we will have self-driving cars who collect fares from their transports and drive themselves to the repair shop when they need to. And they will be powered by the blockchain, not powered in terms of energy, but powered in terms of logic. And yeah, I don't think that's going to happen um, because the blockchain is not a free database. It's not. People mistake it because they understand that it's secure and it's uncensorable or difficult to censor, and therefore it's available to everyone. And that's pretty close to a correct description, but they infer from those two features that it's free. It's not free, it's very expensive. Miners are paying huge bills in terms of energy to append to this database. It's the most expensive database in the world. And it is the most expensive database in the world because it generates massive replication of the database. All the nodes participating in Bitcoin or Ethereum or whichever blockchain project you want to focus on, all the nodes replicate the exact same data structure. Um, and so if you connect to one of those nodes, you know for sure that you have the right data structure. And that's that's valuable if you want to eliminate disagreements. But these disagreements have to be worth the price to maintain this database. And so they have to be highly valuable disagreements. And money fits that bill. Other things also fit that bill. I think contracts fit that bill. Contracts, where I think the early visionaries of Ethereum went wrong was to imagine that the blockchain can have knowledge of the real world, and that's the problem.
But let me pause you because you could also say that it's expensive now, and it might still be the most expensive database in the world as it gets cheaper, but it might still be so cheap that it's that argument becomes moot. Because I mean, Ethereum's been getting cheaper and cheaper.
Is that so? How did you come to that conclusion?
I'm not sure if I can completely back that up. My assumption was that the transaction capacity has just been increasing, and also the number of transactions as well. So that's keeping the price relatively stable. But okay, forget that I said that. React to the
The
first
first
part.
part was
Um, no, I lost my train of thought.
um,
I said, what happens when it gets so even if it's the most expensive database in the world, but it's still super cheap comparatively.
well, I think the conundrum is that it's useful because it's expensive. Um, that expensiveness to maintain is also the expensiveness to rewrite history. And so if it became cheap, you need to find
Beautiful.
some way to keep it expensive to rewrite history. If you can do that, and maybe through roll-ups or proof aggregation, some of these techniques that we are integrating into Neptune, you can get high throughput of a certain kind of transactions. But the the common feature of these techniques is that the number of bytes that lands on the blockchain doesn't change.
That's very interesting. I never heard it said so succinctly. So a blockchain is a database where everyone replicates the database, which is useful if you're dealing in potential disagreements. It becomes very expensive, so it's only useful in expensive disagreements, and it's precisely the cost that makes
Yes.
it work as well.
And circling back to smart contracts, I think contracts are the extension of money. Money is just the means with which you settle a debt. The debt is itself just an imbalance of trade between consenting partners, and that consent is codified into a contract. A contract is an inherently logical thing. By in and of itself, it does not pertain to the real world, and we can use computers to encapsulate logic. That's what they're for. And so I think it's a perfectly natural habitat for contracts to live on the blockchain. The problem is, how do you make them aware of real world things? That's an attack vector. And so I'd say,
But remind me and our listeners and viewers again about the distinction between, because when we talked about Ethereum and smart contracts, what I remember is that there's much more that lives on the blockchain. Like the entire smart contract lives on the blockchain versus with Neptune, it's only the proof
it's
which
only the commitment actually, and
gets
the
transmitted.
proof is necessary to update the commitment. But there are constructions whereby you either aggregate proofs or prove that there was a proof, and then you throw out the original proof. As long as you have some proof that ensures that you're allowed to update the commitment, you can update the commitment. And so the important thing is the commitment itself. And that can be just a hash digest. So take your 32 bytes or 40 bytes or what have you.
And what is a commitment?
What is a commitment? Okay, it's a short string of cryptographic data that is difficult to equivocate on. So if I present you with that short string of data and I say it represents this database that you can't see, then it should be difficult for me to later change that huge database and pretend that it was represented by the short string of cryptographic data that you saw. So, in other words, the fact that you are observing this string of cryptographic data fixes the huge database that I'm not sharing.
Mhm. So I'm thinking of like the analogy of a notary that's sort of certifying some contract. Then in the Ethereum paradigm, he sees the entire contract and the inner workings and all this stuff. And what would be the analogy for Neptune? He just checks an
Well,
incoming
the
stamp
notary
with his
has
own stamp.
clients, and the clients need to supply him with all the data he needs. And then he cross references the data he's getting from the client against the other commitments that were previously notified and published in the commercial registry. And so there is some cross referencing work to do, and there's some internal consistency work to do. But in the end, the only thing that happens is an update to the commercial registry, accompanied with a stamp by the notary, that this old digest now becomes this new digest, which is just one string of random looking data is being replaced with another string of random looking data.
And so if someone would want to dig into, let's say, this topic a bit more, where do they
Cryptographic
start?
commitment schemes and
No,
Neptune.
specifically Neptune, how it's implemented in Neptune.
In Neptune, all commitments are tip 5 hash digests. And so you might want to look at the specification or implementation of the tip5 hash function. The way we prove things about the preimage of a tip5 hash function is through Triton VM, which supports tip5 as a native instruction. And so to find the specification of the tip5 hash function, you probably need to look up tip5, TIP5, and there's a paper on ePrint, EPRINT. If you Google those two keywords, you'll be able to find it. And then Triton VM has a website, triton-vm.org.
I'm just checking out the Triton VM GitHub right now. So you can also just jump into the code and
Yes.
try to make sense of it. Okay.
Please do.
No, maybe not today, but
next week you
maybe
quiz me
another day.
about the code, okay?
Yeah, let's do that. All right.
Excellent.
I think
Thanks.
that's enough for today.
Great talking to you, Jesse. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right. Yeah, likewise. Ciao.